Thank you, Ted. Yes, when I get asked that question about, well, what do you do in your spare time? What's your work-life balance like? I normally try and head for the hills, really, because as Ted says, I'm a total hypocrite. I spend lots of time going to veterinary practices, talking to people about eating well and exercising, and then I get back in the car and down a gallon of Diet Pepsi and have a bar of chocolate and drive to the next practice. So, yeah, it's more a question of do what I say rather than do what I do. But thank you very much for inviting me here today.
I'm going to have a moderator prerogative here because she did say that she's going to hang out on Saturday with friends in Silver Spring and have no plans specifically to hang out with little kids. So
yeah, that's true. But they've got children. Oh, my God. Okay, so I'm really very grateful that you've invited me to speak to you today. And I know one of those things we talk about in relation to stress often is imposter syndrome. And can I tell you, as I've been sitting listening to all the wonderful examples of projects that have been carried out this morning, my levels of imposter syndrome have been going up, 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 up. So please be kind. So we're a rather unusual organisation to have tackled this area of mental health. The Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons is a slightly strange organisation, even within the UK, in that we are a Royal College, but our principal function is a statutory regulator. So we set, maintain and advance veterinary standards. Most regulators will set and maintain standards, by which I mean they will oversee the quality of undergraduate education, they might set a code of professional conduct, they may set standards for continuing professional development or continuing education, and then they'll have a complaints process by which somebody could be removed from that professional register. And we do all of those things. But also because we're a Royal College, which means we're set by a charter, we can also do more. We can advance the standards of the profession, which means we have the ability to enable veterinary surgeons and veterinary nurses to be the very best that they can be. So that flourishing sense comes in again. And that's one of the reasons why we became engaged in mental health of the profession. We're also engaged in areas of innovation, leadership, and lots of other much more broadening, strengthening things which pure regulators can't do. So we are actually very fortunate in that respect. What you may or may not be aware of is that within the veterinary profession in the UK, and this is a global issue really generally, is that there are very high levels of mental ill health, high levels of stress, poor levels of mental well-being. And there's various pieces of research that look at this and why that might be. And I could spend a whole day telling you about that. But some of the issues relate to access to means. So veterinary surgeons, as with many medical professionals, have access to medicines to take their own lives, which is very sad, obviously. Stigma around mental health. Being a regulated professional, you always have to be right. You have to be on. You're a consultant. You're the one who's in control of the situation. And something that might, in people's minds, give an idea of being perhaps below par, showing weaknesses to be frowned upon. Often there's isolation, and that might be geographical isolation in terms of where you work halfway up a mountainside, but also working on your own in a consulting room right next door to somebody else, but no ability to speak to them. So these are all issues, and people might think this is a new thing. And I was talking at the break to Lady Megan, I can't see where she is now, who was saying, my perception of the veterinary profession, certainly in the UK, is James Herriot. I don't know if you remember seeing those films, All Creatures Great and Small, and the wonderful bucolic lifestyle, and why are veterinarians suddenly so stressed. And that's a really interesting point, because actually many people don't know that the reason why Alf White wrote those books was partly cathartic to help deal with his mental health issues. He'd suffered from depression as a veterinary student and continues to struggle with depression all through his life. So when you look at those programs, just see it through that lens and maybe you'll understand things a little differently. Another reason why we, as a regulator, are interested in this area is that we, through our Code of Professional Conduct, say to veterinarians and veterinary nurses, you need to take steps to address your mental health. But we recognise that because of stigma in the profession, a paucity of resources, and just basically lack of awareness of what mental health and well-being and stress looked like, people weren't able to fulfil that requirement. We also look at it through our educational process. So the day one competencies, the things that we expect graduates to be able to do when they graduate, include this rather onerous thing, really, to be resilient, confident in your own professional judgment, to withstand stresses, conflicting demands. How many of us can do that even now, let alone as new graduates? So we recognise that, yes, we need to maintain high standards, but we also need to help veterinary surgeons and veterinary nurses meet those. So we launched in 2015 the Mind Matters campaign. We gave it a slightly separate brand from the regulatory body because we are conscious that as a regulator, what we do also plays into mental health and stress of individuals, because at the end of the day, we are the ones who could remove somebody's livelihood. So we gave it a slightly separate name. We had funding of £1 million over 5 years, so £200,000 a year, of which half goes directly to a separate charity, Vet Life, which gives one-to-one support for individuals, and the other £100,000 a year was given to me to play with to help develop some tools, some techniques, some training courses, and some campaigns which help address mental health and wellness. We're now also just starting to work more on a global basis with this, and I'm delighted that we're hooking up with the American Veterinary Medical Association to turn Mind Matters into more of an international brand. In terms of our work, we have about 30 different, just click these up, about 30 different interventions that we're working with at the moment, which range from training courses through to campaigns, through to very specific activities on, things like wellbeing guides and research into wellbeing and perfectionism. I haven't got time to go through all of those, but our top level focus is around prevent, protect and support. And I think looking at some of the things we were talking about this morning, this is where the design aspect of it comes in. So the idea is that you could spend all day, every day trying to make people better who are struggling with their mental health. And we need to do that, and we need to help people who are struggling now. But actually so much more better to look at what are the issues that are affecting people in the workplace? How can we prevent those things happening in the first place? So the prevent stream is looking at what do we expect of veterinary undergraduates, and how does that match to the sort of roles that they're going to be taking in real veterinary life? There seems to be a bit of a chasm at the moment between people's expectations of their career and what they're actually expected to do in the workplace. How can we improve things that cause stress in the workplace? So things like, the good news is it's stuff that we can change. So stuff like control over rota, stuff like communication within an organisation up and down, things like supporting people to have a good strong social network, particularly recent graduates, so people who are moving from that rather cloistered environment of veterinary school through to the realities of day-to-day veterinary practice. We then recognise that while we're making those changes, which will take some time, we need to give people the tools and skills they need to protect themselves, and also organisations the tools that they need to try and make things better. So under the Protect stream, we've been looking at mental health awareness training courses, online mindfulness courses, specific courses for managers within a business who want both supporters but also need to be supported themselves and have good understanding of mental health legislation. And then the support aspect, which is helping people if they get to the stage of being mentally unwell, which we do deliver indirectly through a third party a veterinary charity which helps people to one-to-one. And the reason we do that slightly differently is because as a regulator, it would not be in the public interest if we were supporting somebody one-to-one and then the next day there may be a complaint that comes in against them, and it would not be impartial if we were doing that. And another reason why I think Mind Matters has worked well is that although it's supported and funded by the college, we have a broad range of task force members. You won't recognise any of these organisations, but what I need to tell you is that they represent students, veterinary educators, practice managers, nurses, business owners, a whole range of people. And it's really important that they've all come to the table. So that's the point at which we get the kind of grassroots information about where the issues are that we can then start to really change. So far, the campaign's been going really well. You can see from that's an example of one of our sessions, really, really packed out. The engagement's been very, very high. We started a conversation. The skills and knowledge in the profession are improving. Although we're not an employer, the downside is that we can't gather very easily data on what's actually changing out there. We can't easily gather data on absenteeism, presenteeism, sickness in the workplace. That's for employers to tell us about, but it's hard for us to gather that at arm's length. So the campaign I really want to focus on today, in the remaining minutes, is a very specific one called And Me. And I would hesitate for you to think that this has anything to do with the Me Too campaign. We were there first. We launched this some time ago, so they nicked our idea. And this campaign straddles our prevent and our protect streams in that it's looking at destigmatisation, but it's also giving people the sort of tools and the environment that they need to get well. And I think that the reason why I think looking at destigmatisation is interesting in the culture within the context of what you're talking about this morning is that essentially you can have all of those process things in place, but if people don't feel the organisation really lives and breathes that it's not coming from the top, you're not creating the spaces where people can feel they can talk about their mental health and their stress, then none of that is actually going to work. You're just overlaying a system on top of a culture which is sick at heart. So that's something that we've really tried to address. So I'll briefly tell you how the campaign came about. So back in 2015, we held a conference, an interprofessional conference, a little bit like this one today, in the UK with doctors, dentists, pharmacists. And we wanted somebody to talk to us from the medical point of view about their lived experience of dealing with mental health in the medical profession. And I asked this lady who's pictured here, Louise Freeman, who's a doctor who works for the Doctor Support Network, which is a charity that supports medical professionals. And she couldn't think of a single senior person who would be willing to come forward and talk on that topic. A single person. So she ended up doing the session herself, and she did it brilliantly. But off the back of that, she and I worked together to decide that we needed a campaign to encourage people to come forward. Senior people who had struggled with their mental health, who were now flourishing, who could give the idea that a diagnosis doesn't determine the rest of your professional career, that could give younger people the idea that it is possible to be senior, to be flourishing, to be very successful, and to be continuing to work with your mental health and well-being. It was okay to talk about it, to show that even high flyers can struggle, to normalise the process of discussion rather than normalise the fact that everybody will get sick, because that's not necessarily true, but to normalise the idea of talking about it. And we also, one of the benefits of working with Louise is that through the Doctor Support Network, we enabled any volunteer who came to us who wanted to be part of their campaign was vetted, if you like, by the Doctor Support Network to make sure that they were in a safe space to talk about their issues, because there are potential downfalls to doing that if you're not careful about it. So we launched the campaign at the House of Commons in January 2017 with an MP, Kevin Jones, who spoke about his own issues, which is quite rare. Again, MPs, members of Parliament, tend to be stiff upper lip, kind of crack on and carry on people. We had doctors there, and we had veterinary surgeons. And this guy, David Bartram, some of you may possibly know, he's been at the forefront of research into mental health in the veterinary profession. And when I spoke at a conference in Colorado, which Ted helped organise, I mentioned to somebody that I knew him, and they said, "Oh my goodness, he's the rock star of veterinary mental health." Well, this launch showed that the rock star of veterinary mental health has had his own mental health problems, which is really quite telling, and we were so proud of David for speaking up, and I'm just going to read something that he mentioned. And he said, "I firmly believe that had I confided and sought help early, I would not have become unwell. Don't worry that disclosure may affect your career. It should not, and your health must come first." We also had a senior medical profession there, Dr. Jonathan Richardson, and I'll read you his quote as well. "I'm a dad and a doctor, and my diagnoses are important. However, they are only part of the description, and they certainly don't define me. Recovery from a mental illness can and does happen." So we've continued since the launch to run out stories on about a monthly basis with doctors, veterinary surgeons, members of the medical professions. And here's one example from the academic community, a senior lecturer in small animal orthopaedics from the University of Liverpool. And we've been mainly running the campaign online and through social media, which, apart from anything else, makes it very cheap, which is fantastic. Rob's story had 25,000 views on the Facebook page when it was put up. And some of the comments on there were so supportive. So we had some from his students. So I'll read you one from one of his students here. "From a student's point of view, you always seemed an impossibly high achiever. You were in the Navy, then qualified as a vet and reaching senior clinician status, and then being so good at mountain biking that all the young interns and residents ended up in injury trying to keep up with you. It's fantastic that you shared this story to show that there is no shame in anyone feeling pressure, and people shouldn't be afraid to talk." And another one, "I always held you in highest regard, even more so now. Proud to be your friend. You are an inspiration for opening up." And Rob also said he found it very rewarding. So actually the volunteers we've been finding have been finding this rewarding. We then took this a step further in April, just looking at my time, minute and a half left, where we did an And Me Live session in front of a group of vets and veterinary nurses, which went very well. And there were some key themes coming out of there about the importance of a supportive network, that a feeling of failure was common and how that needed to be addressed, people wanting to be perfect in a profession that actually didn't allow it, and the importance of having good going back to work programs. So that was really good. And the lady on the end was a very senior professional who'd been president of the British Veterinary Association, so the representative body for the veterinary profession. And for the first time, she came forward and talked about the fact that she'd been on medication for that entire year. And you really could have heard a pin drop at this point. Nobody expected to hear that from her. And everybody recognised what a fantastic, sterling job she had done all the way through that period. So we had some great feedback from that event as well. I'm running out of time, so I won't take you through this. One of the things that I like to bring up in relation to the And Me campaign is this thing called kintsugi. Does anybody know about this? It which I think is just a brilliant way of encapsulating how talking about failures, perceived failures when things went wrong really becomes part of your life story. So with the And Me volunteers, we're encouraging them to talk about everything they've done, their CV of failures, if you like. And this is now extended to a student-led activity, Failure Fridays they call them, where they invite senior people to talk about the issues that they may have had and share them. So what next? We're going to continue the campaign. Originally it was for 12 months and we've decided we're going to continue it. We're going to open it out to other professionals. We would love to have some international examples. So if any of you know of anybody who you think might be a good candidate for our story, please do share that. It will be absolutely fantastic. The campaign is around hope, taking personal responsibility, showing senior leadership, the power of collaboration, and encouraging help-seeking behaviour. And overall, it is very cost-effective. And finally, as I tick down to 1 second to go, I'll leave you to read this one, which I love, from Rebecca Lawrence, a consultant psychiatrist and ambassador for the ME programme. Thank you very much.